Hey everyone. I'm a huge fan of watching people sketch. It's just been so exciting to watch someone like Jim Lee or Jaza or whoever. Tons of people sketching online, especially professionals that I grew up with idolizing. And I thought it would be fun to do one of my own. I'm not really a big artist or professionally trained, and I tend to go for a real casual style. And so the idea here was throw a little bit of pencil down, throw some inks on it, and just go to colors. And because I knew that, I didn't spend too much time with a lot of ink and weighted lines. Probably spent too much, to be honest with you, but I thought I would go over a little bit of the process of what was going through my mind. So far, I literally just threw down some pencil lines really bad. Didn't have anything well defined other than this is where the ink's going to go. You can see that I'm slowly working my way through. I did use a Sharpie for the outline, which is something I tend not to do these days near as much, but because I was trying to do this quickly, I did it. In the end, I don't think it hurt the results, but it's definitely not something that I like to do, especially with the colored markers over the top of it. For some reason, they lose some sharpness around the Sharpie, in my opinion, and I just try to stay away from it. So I usually use these Sakura markers for my main lines, or I've got some Copic markers as well, or black markers, multi-liners that I use sometimes too. But I have way more of these microns sitting around. So anyway, I'm just putting some lines in there, some shadows, creating some depth with the lines, trying to accent what I'm gonna do coming forward. Kind of a funny thing about my endeavors into color is that I've always been a big fan of black and white. Like, I love ink. In fact, one of the reasons I use very little pencil and go straight into ink is because I was such a huge fan of someone like Todd McFarlane, who would do basically stick figures and then go right into ink. The thing about that for me is, yes, it's not as good of a product in some ways because you end up with a chaos or lines that you didn't like. But for me, that's kind of is art. I like the idea of it not being perfect. I like the idea of it being hand drawn, and maybe that's not how everybody sees it. But for me, I kind of like the chaos. I like to see the problem and maybe how I can fix it, and that happens many times just in this little sketch. And again, I really didn't even have an idea of what I was gonna do with this. Didn't plan the colors, anything. I just saw the Avengers movie, and I won't give any spoilers, the Infinity War one, so you'll know once you see it why I chose this character, or one of the reasons I chose this character. So you can see it actually starts to get, in my opinion, kind of cool. I really like black and white, and you can see after some of these lines are built, you can see, oh, well, you could kind of keep it as a final image, right here. And that happens a number of times in this piece, and I'll try to mention it. But as one of my friends pointed out more recently, is, well, to people who aren't artists or aren't me, for example, they don't enjoy the non-colored piece. Whereas for me, I'm like, oh no, that's the cool part. So I decided to just pick up a small palette of Copic markers to use for this. I just kind of threw two different shadows that I know would complement the mostly brown and green color of Groot here, and kind of just throwing down the bases right now. So all you see is that the outline of the yellow and the blue, and then I'm going in with kind of my base color of brown or tan, however you want to think about it. And what I like to do is start with that kind of mid-tone. Well, start with the light tones, then come in with this mid-tone, and right here, oh, all of a sudden, oh, I've seen some images that look like that, But I wanted to go in and do some more detail, and one of the things I've been doing more recently is using the darker marker to come in, and instead of just like shading and blending, I'm using it as, kind of a detail. So you can see here it works really well because the wood grain. So you're drawing the wood grain, and that feels kind of obvious. But in my other art, even on humans and things like that, or cloth, I've been using the darker color to pull out more lines than like I used to. I guess I used to just like do shapes and shades and blend a lot. So I've been doing that, and I've been kind of having fun with that style more recently. So you can see I'm playing around with it. I'm having fun. I'm adding a little bit of the green to the top of him where he gets a little more mossy, and you get kind of some greens, yellows, and blues going on in there. So, and I'm trying to keep the lines so you can see the kind of different depths of each chunk of his forehead, which is really important. You can see there I messed up. I didn't like where I put the highlights in the first eye, so I went back to it, and again, kind of the battle. And it's funny, I just put 3 lines on his neck, which is kind of one of my styles. I do that a lot, where I'll do like kind of dashes coming out, kind of like a shorthand hatching, but with negative space kind of thing. And you'll see later on I'll cover it up like multiple times. I'll mess with it to try to get it to work, and then I decide I don't like it, so I'll eventually take those 3 out. I'll mess with this neck area. Like I just put 2 more lines in there that get covered up pretty quickly later on. So you can see here, it's almost, in my mind, was almost a completed image, and I ended up having to go to bed around this time. It was getting late. So I was like, oh, kind of a cool image. Here you go. This is what it looks like. But in the morning I was like, nah, I really need to finish this. So what happens is sometimes with the markers, because I only have the sketch version, which doesn't have the tight tip on it, I come in with a little bit of Prismacolor color pencils, or whatever you have like lying around works as well. Sometimes I use these other kinds of markers, like I've got some Sharpie regular markers that work pretty well. And as you can see, I'm going in and just kind of detailing everything out. So the longer you work, the more detail that's kind of popping out. I kind of find it funny because I mentioned that there's multiple points where you feel like the piece could be finished. Well, one of my teachers when I was much younger and in high school was like, it takes 2 to complete any art piece. The artist doing it and the other person to smack him over the head and tell him it's finished, which is, I think, true. You kind of feel like you can just keep going forever. And then even when I got done with this piece right now, as I was taking the still shots of it, I'm like, oh, well, I don't, like this part as much. But that's kind of the fun in it. Like, setting a deadline is also important. A lot of people can't even do art pieces unless they have a deadline and a goal. And I'm more of a person that's just doing this for fun, so it's not, it doesn't really bother me, I guess, like to just take my time and do whatever I want, a quick sketch. For me, it's totally a hobby that I really enjoy to do, and in fact, the more pressure I put on myself, the more I don't want to do it. So you can see I decided to go with a background. There's a lot of purples in the Guardians Galaxy, no pun intended. In the Guardian storyline, they have a lot of purples and things like that, and it really makes the image kind of pop. So I decided I would just kind of throw that in there real quick to give it some contrast and make him come out pretty cool. So I would say that have fun with your art if you're doing it. Just don't be too serious. Don't get mad at yourself, because that's just not going to do anything. And just enjoy it like it's you, and it's a place where you're at right now. And hopefully somebody likes the work. But again, this is just a sketch. Like, if I was serious, I would have spent a whole lot of time with that pencil making sure everything was perfect, and that his eyes aren't messed up and off kilter, and all these things. Here I'm just putting a little bit of white to kind of create some depth in the background. I kind of thought about doing stars, but I chose not to at the last moment. So yeah, so hopefully you guys like this. Is my kind of first time doing some art, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it and feel inspired to do your own.